Welcome back. You're watching To The Point. No one would deny that President Obama's invitation to visit Washington and Prime Minister Modi's prompt acceptance has created an opening to put back on the rails the troubled relationship between the two countries. But how easy will it be, and what can we expect as the outcome? With me to give us their answers is India's former ambassador to America, Meera Shankar, and the United States' former ambassador to India, Robert Blackwell. Meera Shankar, it's been announced that Prime Minister Modi will visit Washington for a meeting with President Obama in September when he goes to New York for the United Nations General Assembly. As a former ambassador to Washington, how significant is this development?
I think it's significant because, because of the history, in the sense that the US had denied a visa to Chief Minister Modi to visit the United States. And this is a sense that they have reassessed and come to the conclusion that the relationship is far more important, and that Prime Minister Modi has also not decided to let individual issues, come in the way of the larger relationship, which is in the interest of both countries.
Ambassador Blackwell, would you accept that view that this is a sign that Washington regards Mr. Modi leader and is determined to put the bilateral relationship, which many believe wobbled over the last months, if not years, firmly back on the rails?
Yes, I do agree with the ambassador. I think that the slate has been wiped clean by the United States with respect to the past and the issue of the visa for Mr. Modi. But I think it goes far beyond that. If I can put it like this, Mr. Modi will be visiting the United Nations at the end of September. How many heads of government would like to go from New York down to Washington for a day's meeting with the president? The answer is about 60 or 70. And there's only one who's going, and I think that reflects the importance that the president and the administration are ascribing to the new Indian government and the extraordinary victory of Mr. Modi in the election.
Are you surprised, in fact, by this gesture by President Obama, Ambassador Blackwell? Because up till now, the Americans were fairly slow to reach out to Mr. Modi. The Europeans did it first, and the Americans waited right up till February when the election campaign was underway. So are you surprised in that context that President Obama has taken this step of singling out Mr. Modi and inviting him to Washington?
Well, I don't know if I'd quite say surprised, but it is noteworthy. And you're absolutely right, this was very late in coming by the administration. They should have done it months and months ago. Indeed, we should have never put the ban on the visa in the first place. But I do think there's a willingness and indeed an eagerness to go forward. And I do say, again, it's associated, I think, with turning the page in India and this extraordinary election victory and the anticipation and aspirations of the Indian people. So it's a good time to try to put, as you say, the relationship back on track. If I may just add, one of the reasons it's a good time is that the relationship has not been of preoccupation to the senior levels of government in either capital for several years. So obviously there's an opportunity here, and it looks to me as if President Obama has seized it.
Let me put the opposite of that question to you, Ms. Shankar. Were you surprised at the alacrity with which Mr. Modi accepted this invitation, clearly indicating that the fact that he'd been denied a visa, his old visa had been revoked, and that history of the last 9 years simply didn't matter? I mean, he seems to have accepted an invitation virtually at the first phone call, which was the phone call to congratulate him.
I'm not surprised. I think your compulsions and priorities as a leader of the country are different to those of an individual. And I don't think you can allow individual issues to cloud a relationship which is important for India. I think it's important for India not just because the US is our largest economic partner, but it's an economic partner with which we have a small trade surplus. our frontier technology industries, such as software, basically took off because of the linkage with America. So in many ways, the modernization and the spectacular growth of the Indian economy was linked to the American economy. America remains the largest source of technology, especially high technology, for India, and of financial collaborations for our companies. So I think there are very solid reasons, economic, but also political, as we look ahead.
I want very much to go into all of those, and I will take them up one by one. But first, one more question about the actual visit itself before I move on, Ambassador Blackwell, to talk about the problem areas in the relationship. The Hindustan Times says this is going to be a one-day summit. As someone who's probably witnessed these before when you were ambassador in India, will there be an opportunity for the two leaders to get to know each other a little and to establish a rapport? Is that unlikely?
Well, it depends, of course, on the personal chemistry between the two to some degree, but they'll undoubtedly have a long meeting, and we'll see how long. That's up to the logisticians on the two sides. But at least they'll have the opportunity, and I'm delighted about this, to begin to know each other, because then they'll see each other on a variety of other occasions, for example, at the G20 meeting at the end of the year and so forth. So it's a beginning. I wouldn't overstate it in that regard, but the fact that these two men, who both are very smart, both are extremely successful politicians in their own right. After all, Barack Obama has won the presidency twice. Most American politicians can't win it once, and Mr. Modi's just had this extraordinary election victory. So it'll be a way to start the relationship off, and then we'll see where it goes from there.
All right, let's come to the issues that bedevil Indo-United States relations and talk a little bit about how they need to be tackled. Now, one of the issues that has caused great strain was the Khobragade affair. Mm-hmm. Has it actually damaged the relationship beyond causing strain? And if it has, how easy would it be, or how difficult would it be to repair that damage?
I think what both leaders need to do is to go beyond, the small issues which came to color the relationship in recent years. They've got to look at the larger strategic picture.
Is it easy to go beyond the Khobragade problem?
Well, I think you have to find an institutional solution to issues like the Khobragade problem.
What would that be?
For instance, a consular agreement between the two countries, or an institutional solution by the government of India that domestic servants will be posted as embassy employees, not employees of the individual. But I think that requires an institutional solution, either by the government of India on its own in terms of the policies that it follows, or a joint agreement with the United States.
So here, in a very real sense, the ball is in the Indian court, and if we want to sort out the problem, we can do it ourselves.
Well, we can do it ourselves if we post the employees as employees at the Indian embassy. But a consular agreement with the United States would also be something worth pursuing.
Would the United States be willing to do a consular agreement?
Well, we have to explore it. If we don't explore it, how will we know?
So we have to take the initiative again?
Yes.
What about, Ambassador Blackwell, America's disappointment with the Indian nuclear liability law, which has clearly prevented Washington from harvesting any benefit from the Indo-US nuclear deal? How much of an irritation, how much of an aggravation is that when viewed from Washington's perspective?
Considerable aggravation, there's no doubt about it. Across the American strategic elite and especially American businesses, there is a resentment. And I speak bluntly, as always, there is a resentment that the United States put India at the forefront and brought it in from out of the cold into the civil nuclear domain. And then the nuclear liability agreement or legislation as passed by the Parliament has made it impossible for the United States to seriously compete in the civil nuclear area inside India. So that's one of the issues that will be on the agenda in the relationship between the new Indian government and the Obama administration.
Do you have any idea, Ambassador Blackwell, what the Obama administration is hoping for on this particular front? Are they hoping for actually an amendment of the law, which may be very difficult for Mr. Modi to do, particularly because he hasn't got the numbers in the upper house? Or could they be persuaded with creative writing of rules or creative interpretation of the rules?
Well, again, you'd have to ask them for the details, but it's my impression that the last Indian government and the administration has tried to find what you call a creative interpretation of the rules which would address the problem of legal liability and was unsuccessful at doing so. I don't think that the administration, or at least I hope not, will have unrealistic expectations in this respect about how rapidly Mr. Modi can undo some of the problems from the previous government. But over time, I'm sure this will be one that they hope he will address.
Now, the interesting thing is on the economic front, to use that as an illustration, the Modi government seems to be suggesting, if leaks can be believed, that they're prepared to pass legislation to undo the damage in the Vodafone tax retrospective amendment case. Do you think they could do something similar with nuclear liability laws?
Well, I think, yes, the nuclear liability law has been an issue in terms of taking forward specific projects of cooperation in the field of nuclear energy, because many of our international partners, in fact virtually all, have felt that it makes it commercially unviable for the equipment suppliers to proceed.
It's very important to point out that the French and the Russians have the same concerns as well.
Yes, they do have the same concerns. But I think laws are difficult to change. You know, legislation is difficult to change, particularly as you mentioned the circumstances where there isn't an absolute majority in the Rajya Sabha, and also post Fukushima where issues of impact of accidents on civilian population are very high on the public imagination, if I may say so. But there are pragmatic ways to proceed.
Which are?
I think, well, one, I think India has signed the Convention on Supplementary Compensation, which is an international convention on nuclear liability. The second is we've adopted the rules which actually limit liability. They make it clear that it is not an open-ended liability which is in question. I think we need to see how we can pragmatically move ahead. I'm not sure that undoing legislation will be within the realm of what is feasible. So we shouldn't set ourselves up for a disappointment.
But what you are also suggesting is that the way forward on this particular point is going to be difficult and is going to be slow.
Well, I don't think it need be slow. I think we need to be pragmatic from both sides.
But difficult it will be.
Yes, it will be difficult. There will also be issues of benchmarking prices, because these are not competitively bid nuclear power plants. These are negotiated agreements. So how do we get a price which we think is worthwhile and which the suppliers feel is worthwhile for them also?
So there are many issues here beyond just putting right the nuclear liability law itself. Ambassador Blackwell, there are also a whole host of trade and economic issues, and if I understand correctly, there was a point in time when American industrialists were particularly peeved with the Indian government. Some were even suggesting to President Obama that he ought to consider sanctioning India. And these issues span market access, they span ease of doing business, intellectual property rights. Once again, how much of an aggravation are these from the American standpoint? Because the UPA government didn't seem to respond very much to these concerns.
You have the right list, and I would add to it retroactive taxes. And those measures by the previous Indian government have produced a very, very sour atmosphere with American business. And I'm struck. I think it's the most sour atmosphere by far since the transformation of the bilateral relationship began in 2001. At the end of 2001, so that's very much on the American minds. And I must say also a great anticipation and hope that Mr. Modi will deal with issues of foreign direct investment in a much more progressive and internationally accepted way than the previous government. because I believe there's a very, very large reservoir of American capital that is billions of dollars that is anxious to come to India, but is held back because of those policies that you enumerated. And they're ready to go if the Indian government policies change on foreign investment.
Very quickly, you said if Indian government policies change, leaks, and I have to emphasize this is only leaks, but they've been all over the front pages, suggest that this government may be prepared to reverse the retrospective amendment of taxation that caught Vodafone and several other companies. If that bullet is bitten, how much of an impact would it have on American investment in your country, Ambassador Blackwood?
Very great. It really would be very great because, again, they're not expecting miracles because these are hard-headed business people, but those kinds of signs that the new government is handling foreign direct investment in a different way than its predecessor will have a great impact in the United States.
Let's come now in the...
And I would say around the world, not just in the United States.
That's a very fair point. Let's come now, Ambassador Shankar, to Afghanistan. The Americans are going to be reducing their troops there steadily. They're going to be down to 9,800 by January, to half that figure by 2016, and virtually zero beyond embassy security by 2017. How much of an issue of concern will be the security vacuum or the security problem that possibly arises in Afghanistan?
I think it will be a great issue of concern to the countries in the region. The blowback from Afghanistan could impact the whole of South Asia. So I think it's something on which we need to have a fairly intensive dialogue with the United States. We have a dialogue with the US on Afghanistan, and also a trilateral one between India, the US and Afghanistan. I don't think it's been as vigorous or robust as it should be going into the end game, if you will, for military operations by the United States and ISAF in Afghanistan. So I think this is something we need to consult with each other far more closely.
If you were Mr. Modi's American ambassador sitting beside him when he begins those talks with President Obama at the end of September, what are the key questions you would say he should be asking President Obama about the Afghan situation and its impact on India?
I think you know, whether there is any effort to have a bridge, a security bridge after the Americans pull out. I mean, this is the transition period, but what kind of arrangements will be in place to help Afghanistan financially, to meet its security requirements, through better capacity building and so on, and what will be the commitment of the international community to Afghanistan going beyond 2016. Politically, what is it that the international, the US, neighbors and regional countries can do to ensure a relatively more stable situation in Afghanistan, again looking ahead?
Now, I know, Ambassador Blackwood, you are not a Democrat, but you are a former ambassador to India and you're well aware of the importance of these issues to Indian politicians. What do you think will be President Obama's responses if those very questions are put to him by Prime Minister Modi?
Well, first, let me agree entirely with the ambassador's evaluation of the current quality of consultation between the two countries on Afghanistan. It's very poor. The Indian government, at least as I best understand it, finds out about the major American decisions regarding Afghanistan by watching CNN, and that's just unacceptable given the contributions that India has made to the future of Afghanistan and the vital national interests that are engaged for India in Afghanistan. So the request, if not the insistence by the Prime Minister when he sees President Obama, that the quality of consultation as we approach, as the ambassador said, the end game is very important to New Delhi, and hopefully the President will respond. I must say that with respect to this latest decision you mentioned, I suppose the Indian government was at least pleased that with the front half of that announcement, which is 9,800 troops through the end of 2016, but the very, I would think, anxious about the back half of the total American withdrawal at that point. I very much regret that decision, and as the ambassador said, it appears as if it will be up to the regional nations to try to figure out among themselves a kind of security framework that will have to proceed with no American troops in Afghanistan, which is quite regrettable. But I think you're right that this will be a subject of discussion between the two leaders when they meet in Washington.
How much of an eye, Ambassador Blackwell, do you think Washington will keep on the situation in Pakistan? India is terribly concerned about the possibility of blowback from Afghanistan, but we're also very concerned about what goes on in terms of Pakistani jihadi groups and the ISI within that country itself. Now, that also is a factor that matters to the Americans when they leave behind Afghanistan. So how much of an eye will Washington keep on the Pakistan situation?
Well, I think it depends on what happens in Pakistan. The secular trends in Pakistan, in my judgment, are almost all negative, so it would be surprising if there's much good news out of Pakistan. But you give me the opportunity to say that the Obama administration, the President and the Vice President, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, have just innumerable difficult issues everywhere they look in the world. And I think one question that arises with respect to not just U.S. policy toward Pakistan, but to return to our earlier discussion, is when the Prime Minister walks out of the White House after his meeting with President Obama at the end of September, will this signal a new commitment by the administration to the U.S.-India relationship? That commitment has certainly not been present in recent years, some would argue in the entire Obama presidency, but the President has an opportunity with this new dynamic Indian Prime Minister to turn the page and to put India back where it was at the beginning of the transformation of the relationship through much of the last decade as an important element in American foreign policy, and I very much hope that will happen.
I'm going to ask you a last question, not so much as an analyst, but really as someone who's a crystal ball gazer. Do you think when Mr. Modi walks out of the White House at the end of September, he will feel that I've achieved a new relationship, we've turned the page, and we can really begin to work and not just call ourselves strategic partners, but work as strategic partners as well?
I would certainly hope so. I think that for both countries, this is an important relationship. I mean, if you look at the whole region, from the Gulf on towards almost Thailand, you see an arc of extremism and instability. Now, India, you know, democratic India, very populous India, provides a fulcrum of stability and moderation in this extremely volatile region. I think it would make sense for the Americans to devote greater attention to their relationship with India, just as it would make sense for India to strengthen consultations and cooperation with America, looking at the many, what could I call it, convergent interests that we have, particularly in Asia and particularly in areas in our region.
What good sense I've had from both of you. If only the two heads of government were watching this program, they'd know exactly what to do. My thanks to Ambassador Blackwell, my thanks to Ambassador Shankar for joining me.